I work in an organization in South Florida, and I have no disclosures other than we have lots of pineapples and pine trees, palm trees, pine trees up north. Okay, our area is very densely populated, and we exist in an area known as Hurricane Alley. This is a slide of all the known Category 5 Atlantic hurricanes over this period of time, and it is an area of the world that is at the most high risk for dealing with hurricanes. All right, this is a particular slide that is demonstrating what is actually happening in our global climate presently. We do have warming, we have increased thunderstorms. Our wind is actually changing into a vertical shear, and the speed and the height of the wind is increasing. The other graph is demonstrating this is a 5-year running mean of Atlantic hurricane with related indices from 1800 some odd to 2016. And if you look at the last decade or so, there is absolutely a increase in Atlantic hurricane activity. These are coming from our government, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric of our particular government. So I don't know how we can, some folks can try to refute that this isn't happening. Okay. Surges, hurricane surges, water. There's a tremendous amount of evidence that the water has already risen. We're not waiting for it, it has already risen, and the projections are quite significant in a fairly short period of time. And this is the extent of the science regarding sea level rise. Okay, how I developed this Florida perspective. I came from Boston and I moved to Florida, and the worst thing I had ever experienced was the blizzard of '78. Any New Englanders here? Yeah, back there, yep. You remember the blizzard of '78? Okay, and New Englanders are fairly hardy individuals, and it didn't seem to affect our psyche, too much. When I moved to Florida, some phenomenon was taking place where people who lived there had like PTSD over Hurricane Andrew, and it affected their lives so significantly. I was like, is this like people just like exaggerating their experiences, or is there something really remarkable that took place? So they called it the Night of Terror. Our world had never experienced 165-mile-an-hour winds before. There were immediate storm-related deaths, but the medical examiner for months continued to have more and more dead people arrive, because after everything cleared, they were able to locate patients that were previously, you couldn't access them because of the debris and everything in the roads. And there were an awful lot of deaths from stress. Elderly folks kind of tipped over, and it was a very significant amount of deaths. All the literature gives varying quantities of death. They don't really know, because after this hurricane, 30% of South Florida population left and never came back. Okay, so in the aftermath, 5 days, no food, no water, nobody had employment to go to. There were tent cities, field rationings, shootings, people brought out their guns. It was like third world country of, I had never heard of this living in Boston. It happened in 1992, around 91. I had young babies at the time. But I didn't know the devastation that occurred in Florida. I guess we didn't have that mass media like we do, as of late. So it was quite significant, and it was the worst storm that had been seen in modern times, but now it's been surpassed by Katrina and Sandy. Okay, this particular gentleman here, this is Dr. Alexander Leaf. He's a scientist of all varieties of scientists, and he wrote an article in New England Journal 30 years ago, which they recently brought back. He was a physician that was an advocate for de-escalation of nuclear war. He developed many worldwide physician societies to be advocates, to de-escalate world nuclear wars. He won a Nobel Peace Prize. But one of the interesting things that he did say 30 years ago was that human effects of global climatic and environmental changes, effects on minds, bodies, and ecosystems will be analogous to those of nuclear war, including global starvation. And 5 days of that did occur in South Florida before Army and Marines came along. This is a recent position paper that came from the Annals of Internal Medicine, and it's a call for the medical community at large to start becoming more engaged in these issues that are going to affect our society, that we have more respiratory and heat-related illnesses, the prevalence of vector-borne and waterborne diseases are increasing, we have food and water insecurity, and on the best of days, we still have malnutrition and starvation. And in the world that we live in nowadays, it's kind of sad that we have to say that. There has been great increase in global health security from an interconnected world perspective. The WHO and USA got together in 2005 to try and build capacity to detect and assess these things, but they weren't really getting much progress until Ebola started showing, and in 2014 they accelerated things and they've gotten much better. However, this Global Health Security Alliance primarily focuses on the weakest of countries. Of course, they need it, but in the United States, in our wonderful, first world country, within 48 hours of a mass, or not a mass, but a natural disaster, most folks aren't going to know where to go or what to do. So we've learned, fortunately, from modern disasters and wars that we must prepare, think laterally, think about the secondary implications of these events, logistics before, during, and after, and evacuation plans. Because we are learning from past events, however, we have to consider what occurs after the event. These are our traditional natural disasters. People, when they're preparing for natural disasters, need to do a hazards risk analysis of their particular location, because your location is most important when you're preparing for these things. South Florida, we're not going to prepare for the fires in California or Australia. We're preparing for hurricanes, storm surges, and the like. I know people they prepare for tornadoes. It's most significant to your particular environment. Critical care is quite important in this venue, because critical care is going to be involved in assessing strengths and weaknesses and making decisions for triaging, for life-saving healthcare. Okay, this particular slide is telling us that within 24 hours, we have to change from standard of care to sufficiency of care. And our degradation of care is something that we need to prepare for in our own particular organizations. We have to build triage protocols, evacuation plans, and make partnerships with alternative hospitals. And everyone knows nowadays that we have to, we have disaster preparedness responsibilities. However, we don't do it in a very high fidelity way or frequently enough. The tabletop exercises really aren't sufficient. After somebody has experienced one of these events, you see that the experience really prepares you and teaches you for subsequent events. It's critical that we are familiar with the different types of disasters and action plans in our environment. There are many resources and tools that are available to help you kind of design your own plan in your own organization, how to triage and build up capacity. And because we're going to be in the situation that we're going to have to decide who is going to be receiving life-saving therapy and who is not. So I'm going to bring this question to the audience. If we had a 40-year-old female asthmatic with respiratory failure, a 52-year-old man with COPD and a new pneumonia with respiratory failure, an 18-year-old boy in septic shock, respiratory failure, and anuria, and you could only offer one person life-saving therapy, who would you select? We'll come back to it, if you want to ponder this for a little bit. Okay, in our organization, my organization, we have extremely structured plans, and we have drills 4 times a year. We plan for 4 hurricanes a year. Putting together your team, those are the individuals on the team. There's ethical and pastoral in addition to, executives and clinical providers. Ideally, the people that are making the decisions are not involved in the clinical care of the patient. And we use quantifiable criteria. There's more exclusion criteria than there are inclusion criteria. We base it on, SOFA, and the highest SOFA scores are the people that are least likely to receive life-saving care because they're on the spectrum, they're the least likely to survive. So we have tools, and as I said, it's people with a single organ or a moderate severity of illness that will be first selected for life-saving care. It will be reassessed in 48 hours, and if the people that were receiving the life-saving care are not improving, they will be withdrawn upon, and other patients that have a greater probability of surviving will receive those services. Now, this is ethically traumatic for people. So when we go back to this, which one would you think would receive the life-saving care? Female. Okay. Well, believe it or not, it's the 48-year-old female. Yes, it is. Because that person has a single organ, respiratory failure, likely to live. The other gentleman that has the COPD, a new pneumonia with respiratory failure, because he has chronic comorbidities, he's less likely to live, and the boy is the least likely to live because he has multiple organ dysfunction. So it's a very horrible thing to have to contend with, but it's real. And the other thing that's must pay attention to is that our duty is to your plan. We move from autonomy to distributive justice. And interesting quote here, as long as the reason of man continues fallible and he is at liberty, different opinions will be formed. We all agree collectively, but none of us agree individually, if those were your family members. But what I learned, the key is all of these plans are made in solidarity with your community, your local other hospitals, and it's communicated readily to the public and to the society and with other institutions, and everyone is in solidarity because, as you can imagine, this is a very difficult thing to contend with. All right, quickly, I'm going to just show you a great example of how South Florida did this. Irma, a couple years ago, there were no hurricane-related deaths. Baptist Health has a policy that they believe their responsibility is to the community to maintain public health and safety. And this has implications for how the organization operates. Okay, we go into, Operation Command, and we activate our teams. An entire organization of 25,000 employees. We have an A team and a B team that are re-randomized for those 4 hurricanes per year. And when it becomes more of a warning as opposed to a watch, the teams get activated. So A team comes, and they're before the threat is imminent, team A is in all the facilities. We evacuate days before an event. And Emergency Operation Incident Command is a very effective group. And after the all clear is made, which may be 3 days, 4 days, when emergency vehicles can start getting around again, that's when A leaves and B comes in. Telehealth played a significant role in augmenting critical care capacity. Our emergency departments, and someone was saying about the degree of overcapacity for a facility, they were 100% overcapacity. All ICUs were full. Tele-intensivist became the triage folks of the organization. And other things I think was mentioned earlier before, that embracing civilian caregivers becomes essential. They can really do quite a bit. We as clinical people are leery of lay people getting involved, but they absolutely help, make that sufficiency of care. The community that we serve, the circumstances of one of these events, the post-event utilizes more disaster resources than the primary event. We're dealing with non-hospitalized individuals with critical illness that either deteriorate outside or inside our organization. We have families of those hospitalized and non-hospitalized patients. In our particular organization, the doors are not closed to anyone. Anyone who shows up at the doors is allowed in. All these hospitals are hurricane impact resistant. Anyone who is due to have a baby in less than a month are actually called to come in. And all family members and staff family members are also allowed in the organization. You get very creative. Couple of things pre-event. Everyone's trying to get their shutters up. There's a lot of traumatic issues that come about when people are trying to prepare their house. Also, carbon monoxide poisoning occurs from everyone having generators, and our hyperbaric chambers were knocked out. You have to know where your other areas in the state are that you can utilize. You have to make friends with all of your resources around. And we had a nursing home crisis. Nursing home patients, a lot of them just died because they didn't have sustainable resources, and they were not able to evacuate, and they were not able to transition to other facilities. We have a transfer center also that transported, patients all around. And we made a plan for the folks that are electrically dependent. You can't send patients home or family members home to no electricity. So we created we used one of our auditoriums that was open for discharged patients, and we also have one of our local universities, and both of these areas have access to telehealth. Debriefing-wise, as you know, you lose communication, which was mentioned before. Walkie-talkies was generally the method, and we realized we have to have many, many, many more of those walkie-talkies. Debrief shower signs, garbage fills up very rapidly, and bathroom capacity is also very challenging. And based on the last hurricane, we decided to develop a Team C. Food is gone very quickly. You got to plan for food. And why were there no hurricane-related deaths for Irma? It was because of the experience, the emergency operation command. Everything was pre-planned, and everyone agrees, you can't think outside the box during these events. Your duty is to the plan. And, field hospitals were ultimately set up. So when I think about blizzard versus hurricane, I've come to appreciate that hurricanes are a long-range event that has long-standing implications for the health of your entire community. And critical care's role is so significant in deciding who gets life-saving resources and who doesn't. And preparing for that and educating for that are very important. Thank you.